Hopefully you all are able to hear me. I'm currently traveling and sitting in a hotel lobby, which is the most fun place to do virtual presentations as you have tons of people walking by. Luckily, I found a spot. There is a set of stairs behind here, so you might see random strangers pass by, which you can always wave to as they go up and down the stairs as we pass. But good morning, I think, for many of you. Good evening to maybe some of you on the further side of things, including Bianca as well. But I'm excited to chat with you all around this session around presentation skills, which I think will be a lot of fun. If you have not joined us before, this is our monthly virtual happy hour. So we use that as an excuse to uncover a couple of interesting topics, get together, bring a little bit of hopefully joy and levity to the face as you either start your day or end your day or middle of the day, depending on where you're joining us from. And each week we have a theme, or each month we have a theme, something to focus on. So in the past, we've talked about things like AI and the creative process using AI. We've talked about how to end your day so that you can relieve some stress and be more present for your family or have more energy for your hobbies. And today we're going to be talking about capturing and captivating attention, capturing people's focus. And so, to get things somewhat maybe casually started, I'd love for you to drop into the chat just something that you need to communicate, something that you want to, that you feel like you need to get out there and share with the world. Maybe it is a topic that you present on oftentimes, maybe it's a presentation that you have coming up in the future, but what's something that you need to captivate people's attention for? What message do you want to share with them? Drop that in the chat. Or you might say, just in general, this is a skill set that I want to work on, but drop in the chat why you want to be able to captivate people. There, we'll give you a second to think about that. You might also just say, duh, I think you need to for any type of presentation. So drop in the chat though, why you want to captivate people. I'll tell you that my goal in captivating people is being able to help share this message of humor, to bring a little bit more levity, positivity, joy to their day. So yeah, Tanya says, just general presentations in life, good reason to learn this as a valuable skill, technical training. Oh, what a wonderful way to phrase that, Mary, of building out the internet for all. Maybe somewhat related to what Bianca shared as humane marketing. I see we've got some people wanting to bring the human element to the things that we do. Janine's, I teach humor writing. That's amazing. Fantastic. I hope that you can share some techniques and tips with me. Always looking to work and improve. And that's going to be one of the themes today. I think if you want the most important takeaway right at the very beginning, I guess you could skip the entire rest of the thing, but the most important thing is going to be about iteration. It's going to be about this idea that you constantly want to evolve and tweak and change your message. That's the best way we get better at any skill, but particularly presentations, is are you constantly working to make things a little bit better? Next week, I will be, or actually this weekend, I'll be attending the National Speakers Association in Orlando, Florida. So organization dedicated to people like myself who use speaking as their primary profession or a part of their profession, or they want to. And one of the techniques that I learned there from a fantastic comedian, she is an incredible humorist named Jeannie Robertson. And she always said the biggest takeaway is any presentation that you do, try to make it 5% better than the last one that you just did. Whether that is a new topic or maybe it's the same topic, it's something, how are you constantly iterating? How are you constantly tweaking? How are you constantly making improvements so that at the beginning of the year to the end of the year, you've made massive kind of strides and improvement in terms of your presentation style or your skill set, et cetera. So 5% better, I think, is a wonderful skill set to practice. And so that's why, Janine, I'm hoping you can share with me some wonderful writing techniques for humor writing for that iterative process. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. I see that if you take a look at Sabrina in terms of the video on the screen, we have an almost 2-year-old joining us today, looking to learn a little bit about that. But that is my daughter. They are in the hotel room upstairs. So my wife and daughter joining. But I'm guessing my daughter was like, where did Papa go? And so now this is where she is. So tip number 2. So we talked about iterate. Second tip to captivate attention is to bring your adorable children into a Zoom meeting with you for just a brief moment. So people are like, who is that child and why are they here? So that's tip number 2. So now we'll jump into some more actual techniques. because I'll tell you where some of this comes from for me. And I've shared this story before, so you've maybe heard it. Maybe many of you may know that I started my career at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager. And my background is in computer science and engineering. So I'm obsessed with efficiency. And I remember on the job at P&G, I was constantly looking at how do I do things as efficiently as possible, to the point that I created like a startup routine. I don't know if you remember this, when computers used to have a super long startup time. Now it takes 3 or 5 minutes, but like when I first started at P&G, it would take 15 minutes for your computer to boot. And so I had a 15-minute get ready in the work, do as many activities as I could in those 15 minutes in terms of clearing out voicemail and setting up my computer and setting things up on the side, etc. Obsessed with efficiency. So I brought that into all of the work that I did at P&G, and it worked for the most part. And then I remember finding myself in this meeting that was, how should we say this? It was just incredibly boring. It was one of those meetings where you like want to multitask in everything that you do. Like I was so bored in this meeting. I was like thinking like, can I do some of these other things? And I was brainstorming about the things I wish I could be doing instead of being in that boring meeting. It was one of those meetings so dry, it makes you want to cry. And so I was daydreaming about things, not even necessarily exciting things, but I was like, you know what? I'd rather be folding laundry right now. That's how exciting this meeting is. You know what? Maybe I should schedule a root canal just so I feel something again. It was one of those terribly dry, boring meetings. And looking around the room, I could tell I wasn't the only one feeling that thing, right? Because one person was just like staring at the clock. I don't know if you've ever done that, where you're in a meeting where you just stare at the clock and you're like, okay, I'm going to look away from the clock and I'm not going to look back for 5 or 10 more minutes, right? I'm going to wait until at least 10 minutes have passed before I check the time again. And you're like, okay, it's been at least 10 minutes. You look at 13 seconds. All right, it's only been 13. So that's how boring of a meeting was. One woman in the meeting had just written the word blah on the meeting and on her notepad, blah. And then she was just circling it like over and over. And the biggest problem with this particular meeting was that I was the one leading the meeting. And I had this realization where if I'm bored while talking, the audience has to be bored while listening. And what's interesting about this meeting is that it was an important meeting. It was a status update on a project that was behind schedule. Like it was important information that I needed to share. But one of the things that I've learned, both in terms of my time at P&G and certainly with the number of countless of people that I've worked with since then, is that just because something is important doesn't mean it's inherently interesting. And so we have to change the way that we present our ideas, because it's not enough for us to have a good idea. It's not enough for us to be like, have a really important message that people need to hear. It's not enough for us to say, okay, we have an idea we're spreading. Maybe you've seen TEDx talks where they've had like really interesting ideas, but their presentation skills aren't very good. So you check out after 3 or 4 minutes, right? We need to say, okay, it's not just about the message, but it's also how we share or present that message. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to better captivate your audience, how to help bring a little bit more levity, a little bit more interest into your work, not just so that people think that you're funny or engaging or interesting, but more importantly, so that you present your message more effectively. Now, I'm curious, you're a smart group, I imagine. What goes into an effective presentation? Go ahead and drop in the chat. What comes to mind when you think of an effective presentation, or when you think of someone who is able to captivate your audience? What techniques or tips are typically being used? Share any thoughts that you have in the comments in terms of what makes for an effective or captivating presentation. Yeah, there's connection with the audience interest, right? You find a way to say, okay, how do I relate this in terms of what they understand or what they enjoy? We can say, yeah, there's something at the beginning, a scroll stopper. So that's good social media language from Bianca. Clearly someone like comes from that world of scroll stopping, in the sense of what's going to get someone, if someone were to watch this as a video on Instagram Reels, what's going to prevent them from flicking upwards. Again, in just a moment. Audience interaction, of course. Yeah, prompting maybe for the chat gets in there, building a little bit of suspense, being clear and concise, a memorable story. All of these are fantastic components into a presentation that go far beyond just the content, just the message, just the idea. And we're going to build off of that, explore that as an idea. Attractive visuals, also, I love that as well, with a quick exercise. And this is also another exercise we've done in some of our presentations before, but I think it's a really helpful one to set the stage for what we're going to talk about. But I do need a volunteer for this exercise. Is there anyone willing to come off of mute and work with me this exercise? The only caveat, the only thing that you need to know in order to do this exercise is to know what a microwave oven is, right? To know what a microwave is. All right.
I know what a microwave is.
Okay, Mary, you know what a microwave oven is. Fantastic. You can help me with the exercise. So, Mary, what I want you to do is I want you to explain to me what a microwave oven is. The caveat is going to be that I am a cave person. Okay, imagine that I was just magically transported from the caveman, cave person days, and we're standing in your kitchen. We've gone past the things of, hey, look, we're indoors and indoor plumbing. We've gotten past that, but we're now standing in your kitchen, assuming you have a microwave or pretending that you have a microwave. And I'm like, what is this? Okay, so I want you to share with me what a microwave oven is, assuming I'm a cave person.
Hot fire box.
Oh, fire box. Fire, I know. What is box?
Oh, box. Magic? Cook.
Magic? I know magic.
Fast.
Fast. Fast fire?
Fast fire.
Fast fire. And in what is box?
Small square, no, a small area, small.
Oh, cave.
Cave, thank you, Tanya.
Cave, like, okay, cave. So fire, fast fire in cave? Microwave fast. And why use microwave?
Food tastes better.
Food does taste better when hot. Yeah, and less sick. Less sick if food is hot. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Let's give a round of applause to Mary. Very nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a super fun exercise. It's called Explain Like I'm Blank. You can do this with a lot of different people, a lot of different contexts. You can change. You can say microwave cave person or cell phone to someone from Shakespeare's time. It's a great exercise to practice your communication skills, because you can say, explain what you do for a living to a 5-year-old or to my 2-year-old when they join your Zoom call, etc. So there are some applications to it, but I'm curious, Mary, what was your strategy for trying to explain this microwave oven to me as a cave person?
It helped that you put fire up there as a little prompt.
Yeah.
Because it takes my brain about 15 minutes to boot up in the morning, and it hasn't been that yet. What strategy? Yeah, trying to think about what caveman knows versus not. Yeah, magic, I guess that would be. And box, I don't know where that came from.
Yeah, and in a very explaining a microwave oven as a magic box is actually pretty accurate in some ways. I conceptually know how microwaves kind of work, but I don't know exactly how it works. It feels like magic in many ways. And yet I decided to make it a little bit harder for you, because I knew you could take it to say, okay, what is magic or what is box? And depending on how you do this exercise, some people might say, I would know what a box is. I don't know. But the key is that you adjust it, that you tweak the conversation. You didn't start immediately to say, oh, a microwave oven has a bunch of these buttons on it and it has electricity and it causes these microwave particles in the air to go, and the molecules in the food then go back and forth, and the friction is actually what heats it up from the inside. It's like, you didn't go through any of that. You started more simply. In essence, when we think about effective communication, it is two things. And the first thing is that effective communication is, first of all, it's relevant to the person that you are communicating with. Not necessarily relevant to you as a communicator. Why are you communicating this idea? But what is relevant to the person listening? And so to a cave person, a microwave oven is relevant because it makes food hot fast, right? It makes it so that it tastes better. It makes it so that you don't get sick. You have to understand, you start to have to communicate, okay, why is this important for people to understand? Sometimes that is inherent, right? In today's presentation, I know it's somewhat inherent that you all know that captivating your attention when you present is an important thing. We don't need to necessarily dwell on that. There's a reason why you clicked on the link to join us for the happy hour today. You already are on board with that you need to be able to captivate people's attention. And yet we still started with the question to say, okay, why is this important? What do you need to communicate, etc. right? So important that we make sure that our communication is relevant to the other person. Some ways that we can do that is, first of all, we can think about what does the audience that we're going to be presenting to expect because we want to at least deliver against their expectations or exceed those expectations. We might break those expectations, but we at least want to understand what they're expecting. And second of all, what do they need? Because what they expect and what they need are sometimes very different things. When it comes to communicating what's really relevant to other people, I really enjoy or really follow or have gained a lot from the process described in The Red Thread, a book by Tamsin Webster. So a fantastic book called Find Your Red Thread. And essentially, she suggests that most forms of effective presentations, whether it is in the format of a TED style talk, or it's longer in a book, or it's a keynote, or whatever it happens to be, there's 5 core components. And so Tamsin, fantastic speaker, she got her start in coaching people to do TEDx talks. And she, I feel like, has had more people go from the TEDx platform to the full TED platform. She did TEDx Cambridge for a long time. Fantastic and incredibly talented and smart woman. But she presents the 5 kind of core ideas to your threaded message, your red thread message, is first of all, you have to understand the goal of the audience. And you have to recognize that the goal of the audience may be very different than your goal, right? So the goal of the audience walking in, why are they there? Is it because they have to be? Is it because they want to get rich quick? Is it because they're trying to lose weight? You might give the example of some people want to come in and you might want to do a presentation on how to eat healthy, but the audience may come in and say, I don't actually care about eating healthy. I mostly just want to lose weight, right? Like, I'm so obsessed with the weight thing, whether or not I'm doing something healthy, it's like almost doesn't matter, right? But you need to know that is their goal. It might not be the goal you want for them, but it's the goal that they have coming in. Once you establish that you understand their goal, then you want to talk about the problem, the reason why they haven't achieved that goal yet. And oftentimes it's a juxtaposition. Like, most people think X, but the reality is Y. For example, even with the idea of humor, when we've done research on our side, the number one cause of people not being able to use humor in the workplace, a lot of times they say, actually, I'm curious what you think. Go ahead and drop in the chat. What do you think is the number one reason why people don't use or have more humor or levity in their work? Drop in the chat. What do you think the number one reason is why people don't have more humor or levity in their work? Yeah, the fear of not being taken seriously, that it's silly and childish, that I'm not funny, not professional. They're afraid to be misunderstood. They don't know how. A lot of it goes back to this perception of other people, right? A lot of people's fear comes around, the reason why I don't is because my boss wouldn't approve, or because I have terrible coworkers. I don't know if you remember, Bianca, that's one of the surveys that we found. And the number one thing was like, the barrier to me having more fun at work is that I just work with awful, terrible people, which might be true. That might be one of the reasons. But the primary actual cause, the actual reason, is because people don't make the choice to even try. They let these potential fears prevent them from even trying a little bit of humor. Because other studies show that 97% of CEOs prefer job candidates with a sense of humor. 81% of employees in a study of more than 2,000 employees said that a fun workplace would make them more productive. In fact, I think something like 60 some odd percent in that same study said that they would take less money at work if they had more fun in their job. Like, the people are clamoring for more humor in the workplace, but we just have this perception about work culture to say that it isn't appropriate. Now, obviously there's some changes that we need to make there, but most people let that stop them from even trying. So their goal, the problem is that most people think the issue is other people, but the reality is when it comes to humor in the workplace, it actually has to start with yourself, right? And so that's how the problem often fits when it comes to relevant information. So we start with the goal. We have to present a problem as to why the things that people have tried in the past aren't actually working. And then that leads into the idea, right? The idea for us is that humor is a choice. You choose every single day how you do your work, and you decide whether or not you're going to try to incorporate humor or not, right? So it's that idea. The idea is something very simple, said in a single line. Is what a TED Talk might be about. And then from there, you have the change that needs to take place in order for that idea to come into fruition, and the actions that you need to do to support that change, right? So those are the 5 core components of a red thread. That's for relevant information. If you figure out your 5 core components of a thread in any type of presentation that you're going to give, that's going to make it really relevant for the audience. But it's also not enough, because the problem is that just because as I mentioned before, just because something is important doesn't mean it's interesting. And we all have an attention rhythm. This is similar to circadian rhythm, right? We know that circadian rhythm, everyone has like a 23 to 25 hour clock. I'll make this a little bit bigger for you. We also all have an attention rhythm, or what some of us call an attention span. And by various studies, the common estimates for how long we can have sustained attention to a freely chosen task ranges between 5 to 20 minutes. Okay, so let's break that down for a minute. The estimates for a sustained attention to a freely chosen task. So what that means is you might be really interested in a concept, but after 5 to 20 minutes of things being presented in exactly the same way, you're going to naturally start to check out, right? It's just human nature. You're going to start to say, okay, this is too common. This is all the same. I'm interested in the topic, but I need something different. And whether that's 5 or 20 minutes later, the audience might be super interested in what you're saying. They're just going to be like, but also, what am I going to eat a little bit later? Or what meeting is coming up right after this? Or what was that ding that just happened on my phone? Should I check that email real quick? Should I jump into it? So what that means is that us as presenters, once we've figured out the relevant component part, that's not enough. We need to switch it up. And this brings us to the second component of what makes for effective communication, and that is making things relatable, right? So not only is the message that we're sharing need to be relevant to the audience, it needs to be relatable to them as well. We need to do something different, something interesting. So I'm curious, go ahead and drop in the chat. What's a way that you can make your presentations a little bit more relatable? What's ways that you can add a little bit of, say, levity, humor, surprise, something in there that's going to capture people's attention again? Drop in the chat something that you can do. You can tell a story for sure. Yeah, you can jump into story mode to say, here's a great example. You can use some pictures. Yeah, you can make fun of yourself. You can poke fun in your direction. You can ask questions to engage them. Puns. Yeah, Lisa knows exactly what I like. We can drop in some puns into the presentation, get people paying attention as well. In fact, that's a good excuse. Anytime I see the word puns, I think that's a good excuse for a pun. Let's see, we're talking about presentation. This reminds me of a time where a friend of mine called me over to help me with his slides. And so I got to his house and I got my computer out, got ready and all that kind of stuff, help him with the slides because I help with presentations, etc. And he's like, come on, we need to go out into the back. So we went into the backyard and I guess we're working outside here. And he's like, why do you have your computer? And I was like, to help you with the slides. He's not, no, what are you talking about? No, those slides. He was putting together a play set for his kids outside. He needed help with literal slides. And I was like, seriously? You also said you needed help with your deck. He's like, yeah, this one, the one that we're standing on. So slides and decks, there's a little pun. Terrible. It was a terrible joke. But I appreciate the smiles and laughs from the puns, right? So you can do something and say something a little bit unexpected, right? So these are all fantastic examples of how to make things a little bit more relatable. And this can be incredibly beneficial, can be very helpful. I remember going to a show at a comedy show in New York City at a place called Caveat. And the idea was this astrophysicist who was on stage was explaining astrophysicism through sci-fi movies. To put it more accurately, she was ruining sci-fi movies because she was basically talking about all the astrophysicist stuff that didn't actually work. She was like, there is no, you can't like actually see laser beams like you often see in those type of sci-fi movies. There's no real big explosions in space because of lack of oxygen. And she's like, the force isn't real. And I was like, that is too far, space lady. Force is real to me. At least the force, at least I'm always going to pretend like the force is real anytime I go through an automatic door. Does anyone else do that? Like you're getting ready to walk through an automatic door and you pretend like you open it with your hands. It's one of life's great little joy. I appreciate that. The reality is, but she used sci-fi movies as a way to capture our attention. We may not know or understand her PhD stuff, but as soon as she starts to bring up Star Wars, okay, what's real, what's not? What are the things that we're going to remember? Bianca, did you have a question or comment?
Hearing you talk about this reminded me of, if you remember one time that I did an open mic and you had looked over my jokes, and at some point you had told me, if you feel like you're starting to lose the crowd, you could say, waiting for laughter just like a practice. And there was a particular point in the comedy set that I noticed that everyone was looking at their phones and not paying attention. And I dropped that line. And immediately, obviously I got some laughter, but immediately the attention had spiked. And seeing your graph reminded me of, oh my God, yes, I did do that. And then whoop, it went again. And I feel like it's important to have a couple lines in your back pocket, because that was so useful for me, because otherwise my momentum was down. I just wanted to leave. It was horrible. Right?
Yeah, and a few people.
The line was waiting for laughter, just like I practiced. So it was at the end of a joke that got absolutely no laughter. at all, right? And it was just that quiet. I just said that, and it was obviously a sarcastic, ironic, self-deprecating sort of joke. And it got immediate laughter because it was quiet and like, oh, I'm waiting for laughter, but there's no laughter. Okay, I'm over explaining the joke, but you get.
But no, and it's great. It's an example of a couple of things at play. One is adding a little bit of even something like stand-up comedy, right? Like one-liner comedians. I love Stephen Wright. I love Mitch Hedberg. I love that style for probably 15 minutes. I don't know if I'd watch 90 minutes. Stephen Wright's so good, I maybe would, but he also even changes up his one-liners in terms of some of them become a little bit longer, extended, etc. over time. Anything that becomes exactly too formulaic across the entire thing, even if it's something like comedy, sometimes get people checking out a little bit. So I think that's a great recognition, but then also that you can have one, planned spontaneity is a great skill set to develop as a presenter. So planned spontaneity is where you think ahead of time, okay, certain situations might occur. What can I say or do if those situations happen? If I share a joke that I think the audience is going to really laugh at and they find it terribly boring and don't laugh at all, what's a line or a thing that I can say? Oh, I could say that. Or you could say, like, this happens a lot with crowd work and audiences. Planned spontaneity is that you can say, I know when I ask a certain question, like if I ask, hey, crowd work of someone, what do you do? I might get certain responses, right? Someone might say that they're a doctor, or they might say that they are working marketing, etc. As I start to brainstorm the possible responses to these questions, I can start to think of a little bit of humor or the thing that I'm going to respond with or react with in this situation. Same thing with an exercise, like the exercise that I did before of explaining explaining a microwave oven to a cave person. I know what a lot of the general things are that person's going to say when I do that. So I know that if they get to box right away, okay, I'm going to make it a little bit harder and say, what is a box? If they struggle for 30, 60 seconds coming up with an idea and eventually they say box, okay, I'm going to be like, yes, box is a wonderful idea. I know what that is, right? I'm going to adjust based on the person, the reaction. Because I've done this enough, it goes back to that iteration that I can adjust. And because I think about it beforehand, plan spontaneity. The last kind of thing that Bianca also did in that moment, in that story, is calling the moment. Or calling the room is what we call it in improvisation or stand-up, is to say we're recognizing what's happening in the room. And that can be a great way to break attention or rhythm, because you can say, hey, I recognize this thing that's happened, right? In a comedy club setting, it's the idea of if a server drops a tray full of glasses and they all break on the ground, you have to acknowledge that it happened. You don't have to say, it doesn't have to be the funniest punchline in the world, but you like even a simple line like, see, even the server thought that joke was hilarious. That's going to be enough to tell the audience, hey, I heard that thing happen. We can all have a quick laugh about it. And now we can move on. Like, you don't have to worry whether or not I noticed it or not. Like, I've accepted that it's happened and I'm ready to move on past it. So the audience will as well. Those are great examples of also relatability, right? Calling something happening in the moment is relatability because it's saying, okay, this is something that we've all gone through. This is also why callbacks work. Recently in a presentation, and people were like, why are callbacks so effective? And the reason is because it's a shared moment. It's like a shared inside joke that we all have because I'm referencing something that we've all experienced already. We feel like, hey, I was here 10 minutes ago when we did that thing. That's cool. Like, we're all part of this group together, right? So callbacks can be a really effective form of relatability, right? It closes a loop, makes the people feel smart because they're like, hey, I got that. So if we want to be more relatable in terms of what we do, a lot of the ideas that you shared in the chat are fantastic examples, stories, presentations, etc. The way that I think about it is going back to what do people know so that we can reference to it, things like pop culture, etc. And what do they like? What are the things that are going to get them on board or interested? This was something that we did with the Red Cross, right? So this gentleman here, Pablo Suarez, works with the Red Cross. He's seen here throwing a Frisbee at a White House event, demonstrating the nature of tornadoes. So he's already super into presenting things in a really interesting way. And he and I were working together on a presentation that he was doing on geoengineering. And geoengineering is basically one potential solution for climate change, where you change the planet a little bit to try to reduce the impacts of climate change. One example or one idea that you can do within geoengineering is the idea of releasing a bunch of sulfur particles up in the air, and they act as tiny little umbrellas, reducing the total amount of sunlight that hits the earth. So he was giving this presentation on geoengineering to high school students. So I said, when you reach that part about sulfur particles and you said they act like tiny little umbrellas, I was like, you should reference Mary Poppins. And he was like, that's stupid. First of all, these are high school students. I don't know if they even care who Mary Poppins is. And second of all, I don't really like the musical Mary Poppins. And it's okay, first of all, ignoring the blasphemy that is not liking Mary Poppins. I was like, it's interesting. I think it'll work. The beautiful thing about Pablo is that he is a scientist. So he's like, all right, that's your hypothesis. Let's test it. And so we decided to set up a recording of the students that day with their permission. We ran that video recording through MIT Emotion Analytics, which tracks things like mood and attention based on facial expressions and recognition, and creates this little graph that you see down at the bottom. And guess what happened right there where there's that bump? Yep, that's right. The mention of Mary Poppins. So you can see that a spoonful of sugar helps the incredibly complex solutions for climate change go down. And you'll notice that the attention and rhythm and everything drops a little bit afterwards, but that's the value of seeding even just simple ideas. He didn't go into a long metaphor about Mary Poppins. He didn't explain who Mary Poppins was, etc. All he simply was like, hey, it's a bunch of tiny particles up in the air. They act as tiny umbrellas. For me, I imagine Mary Poppins floating down on one of those umbrellas. That's all he said. But immediately there's a boost in intention and mood. There's smiles on people's faces, etc. See, even small little drop relatabilities of this as you go through, like in a simple association like this, can be really helpful in terms of creating more effective presentations, right? And if we do that, if we know that the average attention span is relatively between 5 to 20 minutes, and it's probably even a little bit lower in virtual because it's so easy to alt tab away and to email or to something else. If we know that's the case, and if we drop a little bit of humor or levity every 5 minutes or so, then we're going to continue, we're going to capture and maintain people's attention, because it's always going to be like, okay, what's coming up next? What's the next reference? What's the next pun? What's the next exercise? What's the next prompt to the chat that I need to do? And so these are some of, I think, the most effective ways to add a little bit of relatability, forms of humor, essentially. So of course, where humor that works, a big part of this is going to be humor is a great way to do that. So stories, I think, are really helpful. Visuals, so interesting visuals. So you can use things like Prezi to do picture-in-picture view. If you're on virtual, you can use images from Unsplash. You could also ask AI to create AI artwork for you based on a presentation that you're giving. Incorporating a little bit of jokes or puns, levity, etc. Having associations like that example of Mary Poppins. And then doing activities is another great way to do that. So I do have another activity that I think demonstrates this point very quickly, but I'm trying to decide between doing this as a breakout room or doing this as an example demonstration exercise. So go ahead and put in the chat. Would you rather do a breakout room or see a demo with another person? Let's see, we'll do this as a poll, because I know some people love breakout rooms. Some people see, oh, we're getting demos. Everyone's like, demo. If I have to go into yet another breakout room and talk to strangers, etc. Yeah, breakout rooms make me break out. I love it, Mary. Fantastic. Maybe Mary's already taken Janine's humor writing course, because that's fantastic. All right, so we'll do this as a demo. In order for me to do this as a demo, though, we do need one person who is willing to come off of mute and help me. All right, Janine calling out the callback. I love it. So Kathy is going to help me. Fantastic. Kathy, you can go ahead and come off of mute. Okay, right. Fantastic. So what I want you to do is you are going to tell a story, and I'll let you choose what you talk about. It doesn't have to be like a full-on story, but you're going to talk about some type of topic. Maybe it's a topic that you have to give presentations on, or it could be a story of something happened to you. I'll give you a second to start to think about what that is. So you're going to tell this story or talk about this topic, and I'm going to help to direct this story or this topic. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go like this. And whenever I go like this means continue on with the plot or the theme of the topic. Okay. But at any point while you're talking, I can switch to this motion, which means tell me more. And actually, let me hide the slide so that you have this a little bit more visual. This means tell me more. And I might even reference like, hey, tell me more about blank. And so then you have to just give me more color and more detail about that concept or that topic. Does that make sense? So if I was saying like, so I'm getting ready to give a presentation, I'm sitting in this hotel, you might say, okay, oh, tell me more about the hotel. It's a Sheraton Hotel in Boston, and I'm sitting across from a market where there's a bunch of people eating food and they have French toast, which looks delicious. Okay, go back to the point of what you're talking about. So we're just going to switch between these two motions. Of this is continue on with the point or the plot or the theme, and this is tell me more details about a specific thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Great. You got something in mind to talk about?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Whenever you are ready.
So, not so very long ago and far away, I was going to a pottery class, and I'm not really a pottery person, but I'm pretty excited about getting the opportunity to get out of my office and go to an art studio and get my hands really dirty. So I'm there.
Art studio.
Oh, the art studio. So it's a local, it's called the Center for Arts and Technologies, Brockway Center for Arts and Technologies. And so they have some local artists that come in, and they have an after school program for students. And they also have some art classes for adults. And this was really fun because it was just one night. And I was taking this pottery class. And so I got there and I listened, and it was wine and wheel, and I was having a lot of fun. And then I realized
about, like, the wheel and the supplies.
So it was clay, right? And so we're all like throwing clay on wheels, and it was also wine. So there was wine and chips and wheels and middle-aged ladies, and it was lots of fun. And so we were learning about how to throw things on pots, and I got in and I like got myself all centered, and I was making pots, and I was having a really good time. And
Tell me
so
about one of the pots you were making. What did it look like?
So I haven't thrown pots for 30 years. And so some of the pots were really wide, and some of the pots were really wobbly, and some of the pots were really not very good at all.
All right,
But
we'll stop right there just for the sake of time. But round of applause to Kathy. Very nicely done. And I wanted to keep listening to it, but just for the sake of time, I want to make sure that we capture that. I'm curious. One, it sounds like a fantastic, really fun kind of place to go to. I'm like, now I want to go. So maybe I need that recommendation. But I'm curious, how did it feel as a storyteller? Did you like getting direction, not like getting direction? And you're back on mute.
sorry, it was hard to follow you and make the transitions because I was into what I was going for. And especially when you went from tell me more to, okay, move on, that was hard.
Yeah. Right. And it's a little bit challenging because you have, as you start to think of a story as a concept or a topic that you want to present on, etc., you start to frame like, this is how I want to say it, or this is how I can say it. I think it's going to be interesting, etc. And then as soon as someone like throws it off a little bit, you're like, but wait, no, I had more to say about this thing. Or how do I smoothly go from talking about middle-aged ladies into back to this thing that we're talking about? But what's interesting is that what I really like about stories, did you have a comment about that?
Yeah, but the really hardest part was I forgot, I didn't get to the most important part of the story, which is I woke up this morning and I couldn't find my wedding rings.
Oh, wow. Uh-oh. And it might be in a piece of clay somewhere. Yeah. So you're like, I didn't even get to the best part, which is a great example for it not going a little bit long. And that's some part of the disadvantage of being distracted by someone like me. But what's really interesting about storytelling is and I agree. I hope you find it as well. Did you get it? I left my wedding ring in Panama. So it feels very weird. I live in Panama most of the time. So it's not like, I'm not going to get it back. I'm going to be there in 2 weeks, but it does feel weird not to have it. But the idea behind this kind of exercise is that stories are an incredibly effective form of communication because they can be both relevant and relatable. Right? Like the plot of a story, the point of you telling a story, like me talking about being in a boring meeting at the start of this presentation, at the start of our happy hour today, was around the context of setting the stage for just because something is important doesn't mean that it's interesting. Right? And so it can be relevant in terms of this is setting the stage for something. But then the added details that we go in through, like I loved hearing about these different places. And I love the idea of just a little line of like, there's a bunch of, there's wine and pottery and middle-aged ladies. Like just that example is like, oh, that makes me laugh, makes me smile. It makes me picture this thing. It's relatable detail that brings me in a little bit more, right? So stories can be both relevant and relatable. The plot part is the relevance. This is why I'm telling you this story. And this is the relatability that we can sprinkle in throughout. So stories are an incredibly effective form of that. But what's interesting about the exercise is do we get this type of feedback day to day from people when we're talking, when we're presenting, when we're sharing ideas? Feedback like that I was sharing? No, it's usually not this obvious. Although sometimes people are like, okay, wrap it up. Let's get to the point of this story. But oftentimes we don't see it this obvious. Yeah, they're pointing at this. But things like body language is a form of feedback, right? Because if you and I are talking and I haven't gotten to know you all that much that well, and it's networking event, etc., I might be like slightly like not fully engaged. And then you mentioned something about milkshakes. I'll be like, what? Milkshakes? Tell me more, right? It'll immediately go into tell me more because it's something that I find interesting, right? Whereas if we're talking in, say, in a business context, you're talking with someone, and I realize like I'm super blurry for some reason now. It's now you're watching like an old school, like I'm almost through a film glass. But if we're talking and things are going well, but then I mention something that you're not super into, right? Say like in a business context, we're talking about things, and then suddenly I bring up price, then that might be a thing where you're like, oh, okay, no, I'm closed off again. So it's going to change. The feedback might change based on what you're sharing. And so as a presenter, to capture attention and to maintain attention, part of it is reacting to the group, understanding like, oh, I was going to do this activity later, but I realized that people are starting to get a little bit antsy, or we're hitting the kind of the bottom part of an attention curve. Maybe I need to add in an activity right now. Maybe I need to tell a joke. Maybe I need to do a short aside, right? It's adjusting to the moment, right? As you go through. So that's the value though of intentionally having these moments throughout, especially if you have a lot of small moments, as opposed to some people are like, oh, I'm going to start my presentation with a joke. I'm going to do a bunch of research on what that joke is. They tell that joke, and then the remaining 59 minutes of a presentation is boring, terrible, dry. That's not effective communication. That's not effective presentations. It's much more about how do you have these small moments throughout the presentation to maintain that attention. And so that's the value of kind of this story. So that is kind of the main focus of what we're talking about today. The question becomes, how do you then do that? How do you get better at giving those types of presentations? How do you get better at adding humor? And it's like I talked about at the very beginning, it's all about iteration. It's all about, okay, how do I make these things a little bit better each time I present them? And think about the types of things that you have to present or you have to do oftentimes anyway, right? So one great example of this is introducing yourself, right? If you go to a networking event, that can be a fantastic way to work on how do I capture and captivate people, even in my own introduction. Let me practice on at this networking event. Each new person that I go to, let me try a tweak or iterate on how I introduce myself. So maybe the first time I might introduce myself and just say, oh, hey, I'm Andrew and I speak on humor in the workplace. Oh, that's probably not, people might be like, oh, that's curious. Okay. But what if the next time I go through and I say, hey, I'm Andrew and I teach engineers how to be more human. That's how I used to introduce myself when I first started Humor That Works. So we focus mostly on engineering groups. And so, okay, that would get people to laugh. And they would be like, okay, how do you do that? Oh, I teach them skills like communication skills, leadership skills through humor and improvisation. Oh, so I'm learning through this process. And this is a beautiful thing about at least humor and even kind of attention is that you get that immediate feedback. You get if there is laughter, you get if there's a smile, you get if there's a leaning in. And when there is, you keep that and you say, okay, how do I tweak that and improve on that? And when there isn't, the absence of information, I've said this in previous events, no feedback is a form of feedback. So the lack of laughter, the lack of smiling, or the lack of engagement is a form of feedback, which means, okay, how do I adjust? How do I tweak? How do I iterate? And yes, I think iterate is very closely to the Iditarod, which I think that would be funny. That is also probably an Alaska race, is just iteration over it. So that is the main focus that I wanted to talk about today. We have a few minutes before we'll close things out. I think I saw a question earlier on around humor and culture, but that's pretty far up. Let me see. How do you use comedy when you're interacting with many different cultures? So I'll answer that question, Kathy, here in just a moment. If you also have a question around captivating people or have a comment or thought or concern, you can raise your hand or drop it into the chat and we can talk about it, but I'll answer this question around humor in different cultures. And this goes back to the understanding the audience of relevance and relatable, and also understanding, okay, what does the audience expect and what do they know? because I can make references to things like the Halo video game, which I played way too much in university and would constantly play. And my friends and I, we still use metaphors from that video game to explain life. We'll have in-depth conversations about how this is like playing on the map Sidewinder, and when someone's posted up in a warthog, and like none of that makes sense to you if you've never played the video game Halo, right? So I need to change my metaphor, my references to match what the audience knows. And that's one thing around culture. Yeah, Mary, you might be a nerd if that's what you're doing. And so part of my work as a communicator is learning about the audience, is doing a little bit of research to say, okay, what do they understand? What do they know? Who can I talk with in the audience beforehand? Or if I'm talking and working with a client, what questions can I ask? And in the presentation or in a conversation itself, what are people reacting to? What's making people laugh or smile? So that's one of the things that comedians will do, is they'll have test jokes where they'll share a joke. And if people laugh at that type of joke, then they can do more of that joke. I do that with puns sometimes, because when working with international audiences, some groups love them, some groups hate them, like groan at them, and some groups don't laugh at all. And so the groups that laugh at puns, I'll make more puns. For the groups that groan at puns, I'll also make more puns, but I'll have a little bit more fun, playfulness, banter back with the audience about puns. And then for the audiences that don't laugh at the puns at all, then okay, I'll switch to more storytelling, or maybe I'll use more visuals. And then that's the last thing that I'll say is, from a cultural perspective, storytelling and pictures, images, visuals, those tend to transcend language issues, cultural issues, etc., because they tend to be more human nature based, right? It's less about here's a funny play on words and more of here's a human experience. And recognizing also, when we're talking a lot of times in the context of presentations, we can think more broad than humor. Or we can think more broad than comedy. We can think more about this idea of humor. Also, because I'm in the hotel lobby, I am not plugged in, and I just got a notification that my battery is low. So this meeting will either end when I close it out officially, or when I completely drop off because my battery has completely died. But maybe that's a good kind of way to gauge when the attention of the computer is done. So maybe the attention of other people is done as well. Yeah, and Bianca shared a great point, is to get feedback from people, whether it's your significant other or friends of yours. That's the point of the community. So this is a great chance to plug the Humor That Works community. Is if you have questions, thoughts, concerns, you can drop those into the community. You can say, hey, I'm going to be giving a presentation to this different culture, to this different group. Anything that I should be aware of? Is there anyone willing to sit with me and listen to a story and give me some feedback, etc.? All of this, all skills, particularly humor and definitely around presentation skills, they get better when you practice it, when you have the opportunity to get some iterations in a safe space, because you don't necessarily want to be trying something brand new for the very first time in a super high stakes environment. So that's the benefit of having friends and coworkers, et cetera, that you can connect with. That's the goal that we're trying to create out of the community, is that's a safe space for you to be able to practice, to try some new things on, to try out a new story, et cetera. If you haven't already, be sure to join the Humor That Works community. So that's humor.me/community. As Bianca mentioned, yes, this is being recorded. We drop that into the resources section of the community. So there's a whole resources tab. So if you've missed our previous virtual happy hours, you can go back and check those out. If you want to come back to this particular one also to do this, you can. Take these exercises with you. The directed story is a great exercise to work on your own storytelling skills. Get your significant other or your kids, play along with them to practice that as just a way of telling stories and getting a little bit of effort in there. Explaining like I'm blank. So explaining your job to a 5-year-old or to a grandparent or to a cave person, etc. All great ways to practice this as a skill. And of course, you can always reach out to me. We have coaching programs, etc. If you need, hey, I want some very tailored specific thing on a specific program, we do offer coaching as well. With all that being said, and the battery dying down, and a 2-year-old up in the hotel room that I'm going to go take, and we're going to go swimming. Thank you all so much for joining me for this month. We'll be back again next month in August. We're still defining the topic on that. So if you have any suggestions or requests, things that you would love to hear us talk about, definitely reach out to us at hello@humorthatworks.com with any suggestions, or drop it into the community itself. But hopefully you all had a little bit of fun, learned something as well. And now go out and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks all.
Bye, Andy. It was fun.